You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 6th of June 2025 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, coming to you live from Studio 1 here at Midori House in London. I'm Andrew Muller. Coming up on today's programme, Israel acknowledges that it has been arming Hamas's rivals inside Gaza. Also ahead, we'll meet the Ukrainian NGO documenting Russian war crimes.
Russia used the tactic, which is a really cruel tactic, of double tap strikes. It is to say that there's a first strike and then the first responders arrive, and then there's a second strike to also harm the people who come to rescue.
Later in the show, a leaf through the Brazilian newspapers.
Yes, indeed, Andrew. I'm here to talk bromances and Brazilian bakeries.
Plus, we'll wrap up the business headlines and find out why Japan's government is funding a global onslaught of J-pop. All that coming up right here on The Briefing on Monocle Radio. And welcome to today's edition of The Briefing with me, Andrew Muller. We will begin in Gaza, where it has been somewhat grudgingly confirmed by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that Israel has been shipping arms to Palestinian factions within Gaza who oppose Hamas. Listeners with long memories may recall Israel once undertaking similar covert supplies and funding to a Palestinian faction opposed to the PLO. They later became Hamas. Netanyahu has responded to questions of the what could possibly go wrong variety by asserting that sowing further difficulties for Hamas will ultimately save the lives of Israeli soldiers. Well, I'm joined with more on this by Leila Molana-Allen, Monocle's Middle East correspondent. Leila, do we know how long this has been going on?
It seems to be relatively recent, or at least confirmation of these particular kind of weapons. They've been sending them Kalashnikovs, so AK-47 guns, some of which have actually been seized from Hamas. And there's only a confirmation of one actual group that's certainly receiving weapons, which is the Abu Shabaab clan. Now, this is a group that called themselves the Popular Forces. They have been active throughout the war. There's only a little over 100 of them, but they have sort of declared their presence openly over about the last month, which is how this information became available, because their leader, Yasser Abu Shabaab, was filmed with Israeli forces last week.
I mean, do we know much about Yasser Abu Shabaab and family? Are they long-term, deeply principled ideological opponents of Hamas, or have they perhaps spotted an opportunity?
They are not. And in fact, when we say clan, his family have disowned him. His family, in response to this, have said that he is cooperating with the enemy who are killing Palestinians, and they've encouraged anyone around him to liquidate him, to assassinate him. We know that Hamas members have been assassinating members of this group since they've been fighting with them. Now, what they're saying they're doing, this group, they are saying that they are protecting the aid convoys coming in to the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is Israel's new way of distributing aid, which has been deeply controversial and very unsuccessful over the last couple of weeks. But they are actually accused of looting those convoys. The people who run the vehicles, the Palestinians who run the lorries in and out of Gaza when aid does come in, say that this group has long looted the aid convoys, and now it's incredibly ironic that they say they're protecting them. And they were asked by the Associated Press whether they have been looting. They initially said no, not at all, and then they said, well, we only took as much food and water as our fighters needed to continue their work. So that in itself is very controversial. It's clear that the Palestinian people do not agree with or support this group. And essentially it seems that Israel, rather than necessarily using this group to fight Hamas, is essentially trying to use them as sort of foot soldiers so that Israeli soldiers don't have to defend these convoys going in. But what a lot of people are saying is there's been no evidence that Hamas has tried to attack these convoys over the last couple of weeks and stop the aid coming in. And it's actually been the IDF that has been shooting Palestinian civilians who are trying to get aid rather than the other way around.
So does this look more like it is an attempt by Israel to establish some sort of proxy force inside Gaza, akin to perhaps to the South Lebanon army?
Very possibly, yes, and currently not with a huge amount of success. One of the main problems seems to be that they are already completely delegitimized by the Palestinian people, which of course means that they can't work particularly effectively if both Hamas is trying to assassinate them and they are roundly rejected by Palestinians as supporting Israel. So it seems that this is sort of a not very well thought through policy that the Israeli government has thought, well, why not? And that was really Netanyahu's response when opposition politicians accused him of funding Palestinian factions, that he doesn't know what will end up happening to these weapons. He said, well, why not? It can't do any harm, and we might save some Israeli lives. So it doesn't seem a hugely well thought through policy. And of course, throughout history, as you said, with Hamas, we saw it with America funding initially Mujahideen fighters as well in Pakistan and Afghanistan. Many times over the years, we've seen groups being funded because they oppose whoever the current enemy is, only to become the enemy in the future.
All that being the case, and I suspect quite a lot of that history being extremely well understood by the Israeli public, do we get a sense of how these revelations are landing with Israeli public opinion and in the Israeli media?
Not hugely successfully. Essentially, the quite understandable public reaction is, why on earth are you giving weapons to Palestinian fighting factions? There's no evidence that these factions are pro-Israel in any way. They're simply rivaling Hamas, which is often the case with different armed groups. They're rivals to each other. And they're also stealing aid from the Palestinian people. And that's becoming, what's happening to people in Gaza is becoming increasingly unpopular in Israeli society. There have now been protests not only about the fact that the war is stopping the government from getting the hostages back, which has been going on for months, but now actual protests about the fact that too many Palestinians have died. Palestinians should have access to aid. Many Israelis saying, we don't want this happening in our name. We don't want people being starved. We don't want people being shot when they go and try and get aid. So it's yet another move that just seems pretty heavy-handed and not very well thought through by the Israeli administration.
Just finally and just briefly, reports of airstrikes overnight on the southern suburbs of Beirut in Lebanon, that being well known as a Hezbollah heartland. Does that seem like it was a one-off, or like it might be the beginning of something?
Well, it is the first time in a few months that they've hit the southern suburbs of Beirut. They have been hitting southern Lebanon regularly, which they did yesterday. And of course, these are all contraventions of the ceasefire that's been in place for 6 months. The problem with what happened yesterday was part of the ceasefire is that the Lebanese army, because the ceasefire is between Lebanon and Israel, not between Hezbollah and Israel, the Lebanese army is supposed to be allowed to step into its duty to monitor and counteract the actions of Hezbollah. Yesterday, when Israel said, we know there are drone manufacturing facilities in this area of the Beirut suburbs and we're going to hit them, the Lebanese army said, we are sending our troops to investigate and stop this. Israel fired warning shots against the Lebanese army and did not allow them to investigate before they bombed these buildings. Now, this was on the Eid of Eid al-Adha, big Islamic festival. So that has made people completely outraged. People who were shopping for the festival, getting ready to celebrate today, were terrified, running out of their neighborhoods as these warnings came out. And obviously those buildings have been destroyed. So it doesn't necessarily mark the start of a new bombing campaign, but what it does show is that Israel is very disinterested in following the terms of the ceasefire or allowing the Lebanese army to actually step up and fulfill its role in these agreements. And it's kind of making the point that when it wants to bomb something, it will, whether or not it fits in with the agreement.
Leila Molana-Allen, thanks as always. That was Monocle's Middle East correspondent, Leila Molana-Allen. You are listening to The Briefing. Here is Monocle's Monica Lillis with the day's other headlines.
Thanks, Andrew. Donald Trump and Elon Musk are expected to speak on the phone later today after a disagreement over Washington's budget bill erupted into a spectacular public spat. The conversation between the US president and the world's richest man is hoped to ease a day of feuding that marked a stark end to a close alliance. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi today inaugurated a new rail route, which will connect the nation's Kashmir Valley to the vast Indian plains by train for the first time. The 272-kilometre line has been dubbed as one of the most ambitious railway projects ever built in the nation, with the government pegging the total project cost at around €4.4 billion. And Switzerland's hotel industry set a new record in the 2024-25 winter season, with 18.5 million overnight stays between November and April. The surge was driven mainly by foreign tourists, whose overnight stays rose by 5.5%, while domestic tourism remained stable. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Monica. You are listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. Russian President Vladimir Putin vowed retaliation for Ukraine's astonishing operation earlier this week, targeting Russian air bases, some of them thousands of kilometres from the front line. When Russia's response came last night, it was notably less subtle than the attack it was avenging. A Ukraine-wide drone and missile blitz that killed at least 3 people and injured dozens. Ukrainian human rights organisation Truth Hounds have been documenting war crimes committed by Russia since Truth Hounds Foundation in 2014. A recent investigation shows that Russia deliberately targets hotels frequented by journalists in frontline areas of Ukraine. Kenza Ramawi, a senior researcher at Truth Hounds who joined the team after studying international law in her native France, spoke to Monocle's Julia Lassica to explain the role of the organisation and its importance.
In Truth Hounds, we cover the full documentation process. So we have field researchers who go on the field after each attack. They collect evidence, they report what they see, their own testimonies, but also they collect testimonies from witnesses. And then they come back to Kyiv. They share this with a member of the team, especially the monitors, the analysts, and then with our OSINT investigation, we study everything together and we elaborate a chain of command, and we try to identify when we can the suspect, and then this allows us to elaborate legal position. And then there's the research department which works and reports about the work that we do, and our goal is obviously first of all to share to raise awareness about what's going on and to share our position and several recommendations.
And can you tell me about the kind of moments after a strike? So, for example, in this report, you're looking at strikes on hotels where journalists have been living, and the report, what happens in those moments after the strike? So with the first responders, is that when members of your team arrive as well? Can you lead us through that timeline?
Yeah, sure. So usually after the strike, the first responders arrive, and it's been established by another report that we done that Russia used the tactic, which is a really cruel tactic of double tap strikes. It is to say that there's a first strike and then the first responders arrive, and then there's a second strike to also harm the people who come to rescue. Usually our field researchers leave because we're based in Kyiv. They go on missions. It can be several missions. It depends. Each case is individual and depends on the information that we want to collect and that we can collect. Our field researchers go to different regions in Ukraine, and they talk to the civilians on the ground, to the person who are here to say something, and they really make sure something that is really important that we really protect in our organization is the principle of not harm civilians when we document, because these people have been through terrible traumas, and it's really important not to re-traumatize them through documentations. So this, and of course the right to consent. So we make sure that they do consent. We make sure that even if they say yes, that like the body language or the way that they react confirms their consent, and they have the right to withdraw at any moment, of course. And once this process, which involves a lot of, I would say human skills and listening skills and psychological skills as well, once all of this evidence are collected, they're sent back to Kyiv and, as I've said before, analyzed and used in order to create a legal position and also some analytical material such as reports.
I'd like to ask about your pin that you're wearing today. It says Truth Hounds, which is of course the name of your organisation. It's a very evocative image, of course, the hound. Can you tell me about that name and how it informs your work as well? This relentless pressure, this relentless violence that you're encountering every day, but that you sort of keep going with this work, and you've chosen Ukraine now as your home.
Yes, I think this can be really linked to the report, because the report, which is about the tactics of Russia to silence the press, and of course it's not only the press, but it's also everyone who shows support to Ukraine. When it comes to foreigners, everyone who shows support to Ukraine is seen as someone unwanted or hostile, or someone who is seen as a threat for Ukraine. And this is for one particular reason, is because if it's dangerous for Russia, it's because it doesn't serve their strategy, it doesn't serve their actions. Yet this is the truth, this is facts. The fact that documenters, field researchers report from the ground, or the fact that journalists report as well, this is the truth, and yet this is why Russia is punishing them for. So I think the more that we can do to keep the truth and to share it and to spread it is the least that we could do for the victims and for Ukrainians today.
That was Kenza Ramawi, senior researcher at Truth Hounds, speaking to Monocle's Julia Lassica. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. You are back with The Briefing on Monocle Radio. Time for a leaf through today's newspapers from Brazil, and I am joined in that endeavour by Monocle's senior correspondent, Fernando Augusto Pacheco, who reads the language, which will help. Fernando, what is making news in Brazil today?
I did promise on the menu clip that I'll be talking about bromances, and
you did.
We must talk about this. So Lula is...
Do we have to?
We have to.
Okay.
Lula is in Paris at the moment for a state visit, and it's not just a normal state visit. I think Lula and Macron, they are very close. I think there's a genuine friendship there. Of course, Macron went to Brazil as well last year. There was the famous photographs of them jumping, I believe, in the Amazon rainforest.
Regrettably, I missed that.
Well, you missed that. But don't worry, I think now they have other photo opportunities at the Eiffel Tower. At the end of the state visit, they were there with their respective wives, Brigitte and Janja, and the whole of the Eiffel Tower was illuminated with the Brazilian colors as well. So it's quite a special one. I'll talk about more serious stuff, but I have a clip for you. It's Lula saying a few words at the Eiffel Tower. I think he was quite emotional.
Estamos aqui meia-noite na Torre Eiffel, Macron e eu, trabalhando para melhorar a França e o Brasil.
Does he take his own guitarist with him?
We love music. And it was midnight. How romantic was that? And talking about music, we also took our culture minister there, Margarete Menezes. She's a very famous pop star in the country as well. So Lula, out of nowhere, said, Margarete, sing a song for us. And she was not expecting that, but she did perform a beautiful song by another singer, Milton Nascimento.
Is this going to have played well with the folks back home? Will Brazilians be happy that their president is being thus feted in Paris?
Well, not everyone. There's a side of me, for example, that is quite happy that Lula, unlike Bolsonaro, have very good relationships with many of the world leaders. But other people say Lula's spending a bit too much on his travels. He's saying he's in a presidential suite. I mean, he's a president, right?
Clue in the name.
Exactly. And there were some beautiful moments as well, Andrew, because more recently we had the iconic Brazilian photographer Sebastião Salgado, who died. He's a dual citizen, actually. He was also French because he lived most of his adult life in the country. So there were a lot of tributes about that as well. So it was kind of quite a special moment for both presidents.
But we will find out, I guess, from future polling exactly how this is landing with the Brazilian people. But what are the first polls telling us about whether Lula is going to stay in the job?
Difficult numbers for Lula. So O Globo today, I think they published the first 2026 presidential poll. And in the second round, Lula, although he's slightly ahead, he will have a very difficult time with most of the candidates in the right. There's one number as well that I would like to mention. 2/3 of the electorate don't want Lula to actually be a candidate for the re-election. So even people from the left are kind of concerned. I don't know if it's because of age or perhaps because he's not as popular as in his previous terms. But I'll give you some of the numbers. Well, first of all, Bolsonaro, if he will be the candidate, which I don't think he will, in the second round they'll be tied with 41% of the vote. And if it's Bolsonaro's wife, Michele Bolsonaro, Lula, it's a little bit ahead, 43, but Michele Bolsonaro is 39. So it will be a very tough election. And there are other numbers. I mean, I'm not going to mention all of them, but one name that I think is quite credible, and I think our listeners should pay attention, is Tarcísio de Freitas. He's the governor of São Paulo. Being the governor of São Paulo is probably the second most powerful political position in Brazil. So he's with 40 and Lula 41. So, it is a bit dangerous for Lula. So it's not just Bolsonaro. There are other names in the right sphere that could do very well.
Is that where we presently are with conservative opposition to Lula, though, that if it's not Bolsonaro, it's likelier to be his wife?
Well, I personally don't think it's going to be his wife, but I think the Brazilian press like to play around with that because I think I mean, anything can happen, but I think it would be too crazy. He doesn't have any political experience, unlike other political spouses in the past. She's evangelical. She does have some sort of charisma among this community, but I think it's unlikely. But you know, Andrew, how the world is, right?
At the top of the show, not only did you promise us bromances, which we have dealt with, you also promised us bakeries.
Well, and I have amazing numbers for you. According to the latest statistics, a new bakery opens in Brazil every 6 minutes. It's incredible.
So probably literally on the dot of 6 minutes. Is this coordinated and synchronized? So they are being rolled out 10 times an hour at precisely delineated intervals.
So basically one bakery for the duration of our segment here, of our conversation. And can I be honest, this is fabulous news. I think I've always been a fan of Brazilian bakeries. I think I wrote many pieces for Monocle. It's a place where you can find love, where you can eat bread. It's really a social place.
Is this some long con you've been perpetrating that is at last paying off? Did you buy low on Brazilian bread?
I think so. Maybe I should open myself, and that's the beauty of it. 86% of all Brazilian bakeries there are owned by individuals, so they're not necessarily by big chains of bakeries. So I think that's quite special as well. And since the pandemic, Brazilians, they like to buy fresh produce as well, and they like to keep things local. So they go to their local supermarket and local bakery as well. And Andrew, I would love you to come to Brazil and try the Brazilian bread.
It doesn't sound like I'd be able to do anything else. Is there going to be anything open that isn't a bakery by the time I get there?
Oops, another one just opened up. You know, it's like we have amazing. It's funny because we call our bread French bread, but it's not French, but we call it
clearly
French.
Not. It's Brazilian.
It's Brazilian, but it's being influenced by the baguette, but it's a little bit softer. I think the French would be a bit, oh my God, don't call the French bread, but that's how we do it. And in my opinion, it's better than a baguette.
Do you think this is what Macron and Lula were talking about?
I'm sure they're talking about this.
Fernando Augusto Pacheco, Monocle's senior correspondent. Thank you. You are listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. You are listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. It's time now to catch up on the latest business news with Bloomberg reporter Ewan Potts, who joins us from Bloomberg's London newsroom now. Ewan, as we have been alluding to on various programmes throughout the day, the world's most powerful individual and the world's richest have been conducting a messy falling out. But in amongst all that, US President Donald Trump has apparently found the time to speak to Xi Jinping, his opposite number in China. Do we know what they talked about?
Yeah, a very enjoyable public spat between Donald Trump and Elon Musk. But Andrew, I know you've been reading all of that anyway, so I want to talk about what's perhaps of rather more consequence, and that is that phone conversation between the leaders of the world's two biggest economies. It's actually the first time they've spoken since before the inauguration. We're told it lasted for 90 minutes. And the headlines from the US president, who's also always keen to talk about these things, he posted that he found Xi, in all caps, obviously, very tough and extremely hard to make a deal with 3 exclamation marks. I think that's about a medium amount of punctuation. Trump says he got what he wanted, although he is, of course, wants to do that anyway. He says he got a commitment to restore the flow of rare earth magnets. China, of course, controls a vast proportion of the world's rare earths, which are crucial for a lot of manufacturing processes. What's less clear, I think, is exactly what China got from the conversation. Xi has not been tweeting about it much. One of the few clear takeaways appears to be an assurance that the US will continue to welcome Chinese students. That's something which China wanted. But one analyst told us that China's core demands remain in place. Those are of equal sanction relief, reciprocal enforcement mechanisms, and crucially, an end to containment of its technology aspirations. And on that final point, I think Xi can point to something useful. We've learned that the next round of talks will include US Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, and he's the man in charge of curbs on the sale of advanced technology to China. So perhaps that signals that tech restrictions are in play for Trump. So I think that is useful for Beijing. But when it comes to the big issues of trade and tariffs, well, it doesn't look like the two sides are any closer to any kind of resolution.
We should talk about one specific aspect of trade or potential trade between the United States and China, and this is where electric vehicles are concerned. And this is an area in which China has had some success in recent years. It was reported here in London yesterday that a Chinese brand, BYD, has tipped Tesla over to become the UK's most popular electric vehicle. But it's not all going that swimmingly for them elsewhere.
Yeah, they've had a huge amount of success in the electric car market, but fascinating to find out what's going on in China itself. Shareholders at the world's biggest maker of electric cars, you mentioned BYD, have had a really bumpy ride these past couple of weeks. Tesla shareholders indeed have had a bumpy ride as well, but for different reasons. BYD's market value has tumbled actually by $20 billion over the past 2 weeks. Investors are fretting about slow consumer spending in China and particularly a brutal price war. It's not just the markets that are worried about this. In a very unusual move last week, China's Commerce Ministry summoned some of the world's biggest car makers to discuss whether the industry is using a loophole to mask their weakening sales. Practice sees car makers that have failed to meet their targets distribute new vehicles to used car dealers and other companies. And these essentially new cars then appear on the resale market with zero mileage. But manufacturers record them as sales, even though they haven't actually reached the end consumer. So it's a way that China's car companies can massage their sales numbers. Last week as well, BYD slashed its car prices by as much as 34%, escalating this already rampant price war. Chinese consumers can now pick up a Seagull hatchback for less than $8,000, so pretty cheap. So it's a really good time to buy a new EV in China, but it's certainly adding to fears around the sustainability of the country's burgeoning auto sector.
Ewan Potts at Bloomberg, thank you as always for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing. This is The Briefing on Monocle Radio. The Japanese government is pouring record budgets into the global expansion of J-pop, symbolised by last month's Music Awards Japan 2025, while fascinating developments are occurring domestically. Japanese listeners continue to overwhelmingly prefer domestic music, yet the domestic scene itself is undergoing major changes. Can J-pop maintain this delicate balance between global ambition and domestic identity? Well, I'm joined by Patrick St. Michel, a Tokyo-based writer who focuses on Japanese music. Patrick, first of all, what do we know about the extent of the Japanese government's commitment to exporting J-pop and why they have gone all in on it?
In recent years, the Japanese government and an assortment of music industry organizations have come together to form a new group called the Culture and Entertainment Industry Promotion Association, SEPA, much more catchy. And they have come together aware that there is booming interest around the globe in Japanese pop culture all around, starting with anime and video games. But in recent years, there have been signs of J-pop and other areas of Japanese music enjoying the same level of global attention. So picking up on these trends, which have been spurred by developments online and via streaming services, the government is really seeing an opportunity now to push a corner of entertainment that in the past was kind of overlooked in the greater export of Japanese entertainment.
I mean, Japanese consumers do vastly prefer listening to Japanese music, which is obviously reasonable of them. But are there any concerns that the music itself may have to change or adapt to become more globally palatable?
This is something that's long been discussed within the Japanese music industry, especially in the past decade, as Korean pop music has kind of found a way to find a very strong niche in the Japanese market as well. So there has been a lot of sort of a back and forth in the industry between being like, do we try to chase after sort of global trends, or do we, keep doing what we're doing that sets our sound apart, which is kind of focusing more on rock and unique forms of electronic music. Right now, you see kind of a split between the two sides. There are groups that are very much built from the classic J-pop sound, rooted in rock music and various internet-born electronic sounds. But you also have groups that are trying to dip their toes into the ideas of being a global group, playing with American hip-hop or other forms of popular global music.
So is that the most noteworthy trend, do you think, at the moment within domestic Japanese pop?
It's one of the most interesting, this split of trying to figure out what the future identity of J-pop will look like. There's a few other compounding developments that are also forcing the Japanese music industry to sort of like imagine what its future will look like. Earlier this year, Japan saw its first AI-generated viral hit, a song that got really big on TikTok that was fully created using generative AI music software. And that kind of caught the attention of the industry of being like, oh, what does this mean for our future? How do we reckon with the fact a basic AI meme song can kind of gain all of this attention? And at the same time, you are also kind of seeing a push against that with a rise in sort of traditional Japanese pop sounds via J-pop idols, who are very human and kind of fallible and sometimes not the best singers, but it feels more human. So it's a lot of trying to work out as J-pop finally faces the world, what do we sound like? What do we present to the world?
Well, on that thought, just finally and just briefly, is there one particular track or indeed one particular artist you would recommend to our listeners as emblematic of where J-pop is going?
Right now, the absolute biggest J-pop act in the country is a trio called Mrs. Green Apple. And they are a great example of this sort of Japan-born sound. They don't take as many influences from overseas pop music. They're kind of playing around with rock, balladry, but also kind of smashing in like elements of auto-tune or even like some elements of rap production, but doing it in a unique way, offering their own perspective on it and kind of presenting this like unique J-pop sound that you can't really hear anywhere else.
Patrick Saint-Michel, thank you for joining us. That was Patrick Saint-Michel, Tokyo-based writer who focuses on Japanese music. And that is all for this edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Monica Lillis and Ryuma Takahashi in Tokyo. Our researcher was Francesca Jilks and our studio manager was Mariella Bevan. The Briefing returns on Monday at the same time, midday London. I'm Andrew Muller. Thanks for listening.